Well, hey, welcome to another edition of AP Current English. This is actually going to be the first of a few videos today, but today I wanted to talk about The Handmaid's Tale, and specifically I wanted to talk about the epigraphs that are in the beginning of the text, as well as the part one. Here we go. So these are the three epigraphs that are at the beginning of the text. I actually want to talk about them in reverse order. The one at the bottom is a Sufi proverb, right? And it says, "In the desert there is no sign that says, 'Thou shalt not eat stones,'" right? And this is just basically the idea that we don't make rules barring things that people don't want to do, right? Nobody has to say that there's a rule against eating stones because nobody wants to eat stones. Instead, all of the laws and rules that we have are there to prevent people from doing things that they do want to do. The second one, the one in the middle, is from Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, which you may have familiarity with. It says, "But as to myself, having been wearied out for many years with offering vain, idle, visionary thoughts, and at length utterly despairing of success, I fortunately fell upon this proposal." Right? And we remember A Modest Proposal as a satirical essay in which Jonathan Swift proposes that in order to deal with famine problems that we eat babies, right? This is a type of satire called reducto ad absurdum, which basically means that an idea is reduced to the point of absurdity to point out the satire, or it's using satire through taking an argument to its ridiculous end, to absurdity. What does it tell us? It tells us that the text we're about to read is a similar sort of satire. And then finally, the first one here, probably the one that's most important, is from the Bible. And it says, when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, 'Give me children, or else I die.' And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, 'Am I in God's stead, who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb?' And she said, 'Behold, my maid Bilhah, go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her.'" Okay, so this is a biblical story about the biblical character Jacob. And the story basically goes, Jacob goes to his uncle and asks his uncle to marry his cousin, who is Rachel. And his uncle, whose name is Laban, basically, he says, if you work for me for 7 years, you can marry my daughter. And so he says, okay. And he works for 7 years. And then he goes and he marries Laban's daughter. And then, when the sun comes up and it's light out, he's like, wait a minute, I married the wrong daughter. I married your older daughter. Can I still marry your younger daughter? And Laban basically says, I can't marry off my younger daughter before my older daughter. So of course you had to marry my older daughter. But sure, you can marry my younger daughter too. Just work 7 more years, right? And so he does so, and he also marries Rachel. So Jacob ends up marrying Leah, and he marries Rachel. And as the story goes, he and Leah have multiple children, many sons, I don't know how many daughters, and Rachel feels jealous. And this is where the epigraph comes in, and she says, you can't have children with me. Behold, my maid, or my handmaid, and go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, and that I may also have children by her. Right. So basically saying, through my maid, you can have a child with me. Perhaps you see a problem in this. Certainly, if we read this from a contemporary point of view, right, we see it as a problematic thing. First, that Jacob married 2 sisters, in polygamy, which, while it does have a history in America, we may be slightly aghast at it. Also, the issue of offering up one's handmaid sexually in order to have a child, and that sort of enslavement really is what that is. And so certainly we might see that as problematic. But this biblical story then is one that is kind of used as, I suppose, inspiration for what we're about to read. Okay, so the second part that I want to talk about is part 1, and it's really short. It's entitled Night. You notice if you look at the table of contents, we see an alternating night with something else or nap with something else, suggesting kind of sleep time and something else, right? And so part 1 then, which is also chapter 1, we get a gymnasium, right? And this is where we slept. Now, who we are, right, doesn't exactly say, but as the narrator is talking, right, we get a little sense of time, right? That there are eras of students really who've gone through this gymnasium, and basically referring to school dances, and there are the felted skirts from the 50s, later the mini skirts and stuff in the 70s, then or 60s, the pants maybe in the 70s, and the green spiky hair of the punk people in the 80s, right? And so we get that kind of progression, which tells us that this is taking place, at the earliest in the 1980s, probably a little bit after. And then the narrator refers to kind of the yearning and romance of teenagers and that sort of thing, and how they kind of acted and that sort of thing. But it also talks about where they sleep, right? And they're sleeping then on cots they had flannelette sheets like children's and army issue blankets, old ones that still said U.S., right? So this is no longer the United States. Where they are is someplace new. We folded our clothes neatly and laid them at the stools at the end of the beds, which seems kind of military also, or prison, right? Similar kinds of bed-making sorts of ways, the way you'd set it up, the way you'd organize your bunk. There's a reference to Aunt Sarah and Aunt Elizabeth who patrol, right? And they have cattle prods hanging from their leather belts, right? Which suggests that the people, the we that it refers to, are being treated like cattle, are being dehumanized, and the situation they're in is dehumanizing. Also, that the people who patrol them are named ants, which is maybe a strange thing for those of us who don't associate ants with people who might use cattle prods on us. But then we find out no guns, that the guns only belong to the guards who are specially picked from the angels, right? And so there seems to be some sort of ironic reference to people would have guns as angels there, right? We see whatever has taken over, and we'll learn more about it later, of course, is religious, right? They're referring to angels, soldiers, maybe, as angels. And so it talks a little bit about what they do, but in the end, we learn to whisper almost without sound, right? Because they're not allowed to talk to each other. In the semi-darkness, we would stretch out our arms when the ants weren't looking and touch each other's hands across space. We learn to lip read, our heads flat on the beds, turned sideways, watching each other's mouths. In this way, we exchange names from bed to bed: Alma, Janine, Dolores, Moira, June. And that last part is important for a couple of reasons. If you've seen the Handmaid's Tale Hulu show, the main character, the narrator in the book, is named June. And the reason that is because of those names that I just read, that's the only one that's never used again in the book. And so readers have over time decided that obviously then the narrator must be named June, right? Seems logical. From what I understand, I went to a lecture once that Margaret Atwood gave. She didn't mean to do that, but because readers decided that, that's kind of what it is, which I think is an interesting way to look at meaning in literature. The other thing, though, I think that it's really important that we end with names, because as you'll see, names are one of the things that are stripped away from the people inside this book. And I think that names are really powerful things. And so it's important that we're kind of left with that. Okay, there's going to be another video coming soon.